And now, please let me introduce our featured guests. I'm not going to do a big bio because all of them, their claim to fame in this room is that they were friends of Lorenzo Albacete. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about them, and I'm going to mess this up because I should have asked one of them where they are now before I began. But we have the illustrious goat farmer from Texas, Jay Roussel, who has I've known for a long time and is a good friend of mine and a fan of Lorenzo and has spent many, many times laughing and eating with him, especially. Another one of our guests is writer and poet and mystic and mom and wife and now resident of upstate New York, Rita Simmonds, who will share her experience with Lorenzo as well. And she has insisted that I am not allowed to say that she caused Monsignor to be pulled over many times. And then finally, our last guest is COO of a tech startup, which I did not know, but fantastic, in Oakland, California, Michelle RICONSCENTE. She is an education expert. She is a researcher, former professor, and now she's doing what all of us want to do in education, which is probably make money. So good for you, Michelle. So let's begin our episode and let's have a great time. I really encourage you to get ready to ask questions if you want to know more about Lorenzo or about the video, and really, especially if you have something that you want to share because you met him or knew him, we would love to hear that too. So I'm going to begin actually in Texas with my friend Jay Roussel, who's going to tell us. Jay, can you tell us a little bit about how you met Lorenzo? What was the context and how did you stick around?
Yeah, and so I will kind of blend a little bit of how I, first encountered the writings of Giussani and then Albacete, because they all kind of came at the same time. September 11th, Albacete, around that period, it might have been that day, he was supposed to fly into Houston and do a presentation of one of Giussani's books, and we had to cancel that event, obviously. And so the next month, we rescheduled our event, and he was coming in, and our responsible, Paolo Zaffaroni, he picked him up from the airport, and they had like this whirlwind day of driving through Galveston and kind of your, crazy Albacete story that I've come to know and love. And then he called me. He said, "Hey, we're going to this Brazilian steak place. It's kind of one of these all-you-can-eat great steak places." And he goes, "Would you like to join us?" And at the time, I thought nothing could be more boring than having steak with a priest. But I kind of did it as a work of mercy with Paulo, like a charity, to go. And I could tell from Paulo's laugh when he said it, like, "Yeah, you have no idea." And at that time, I had just, I had barely known the movement. I met Paulo, maybe 9 months before or so, or about a year before. So I go to this meeting, and I was used to rather these kind of dinners. You say something polite, they say something polite. You kind of talk about, you try to sound smart and a man of the world, and they say whatever they're gonna have to say, and then you eat your steak, and then you go about your way, and you go to sleep, and nothing really changes. And about 5 minutes into the conversation, he goes, "You don't understand anything." And I mean, he just really ripped down this kind of veneer. First of all, he saw right through it. Secondly, he really showed to me that I was missing what I consider the basics of the faith. I mean, something so basic that you wonder, like, how are you even here? And it was a beautiful experience because I was exposed, but in a way that was very, like, beautiful. Like, now this is where I'm coming with my questions. This is what I've been looking for. This is a completely different experience. It was an all-you-can-eat place, and I don't think I ate like 10% of what I would normally eat because I was just enthralled with this man. And so I said to him before he's leaving, and I go to sleep very early, and it was like 9:30, and I said, "Hey, can we come and go with you to Paulo's apartment and then have some drinks or something just to spend more time with him?" And so Paulo and Monsignor agreed, and I came home at that time to my wife, and I went through the house, and our oldest daughter was not, about 9 months at the time. And so I walked into the house. I'm looking all over for him. I go into my daughter's room, and there's my wife. She's in pajamas, and she's putting our oldest daughter down into the bed. And I can see from the cheeks that she had just finished nursing. And this is like the ideal scenario of like, we're going to go to sleep now. And I was like, I need you to put some, pants on. Let's go. We're going to go meet Albacete. You got to meet this priest. And she was like, well, I'm going to sleep and we're done for the evening. I was like, no, you have to. And she's, no, I mean, we can wait another day. I said, no, I tell you, as your husband, I won't say this very often. I tell you as your husband, I said, let's please get in the car. We have to go meet this guy. And so she kind of looked at me like this strange look, like, wow, what has happened to you? So she grabs the baby, and we go to Paolo's apartment, and we spend the evening with Monsignor until about 2 or even later, 2 a.m. at least. And it was beautiful. The stories and the fact that he would tell these mundane, funny stories that would have these profound points. It's just an incredible experience. And I went to sleep that night, and I was a little worried. I was like, oh, hope I can wake up early and still, get to work and do all the things I need to do. And I woke up totally refreshed. And at that time, Paolo and I would speak nearly daily. And so he called me in the morning, and he said something that probably was the single most important thing I had ever heard in my entire life. And Paolo said to me, I said, look, I've been friends with you for a year, going to school community. I knew the people of CL were very interesting, but the work was a little unapproachable for me. I had trouble with it. And I kind of looked at it like, oh, it's a tax for, being close to some very good people. And, but I said, man, I've been friends with you for a year. I really don't understand what I'm reading, but I will follow Albacete to the end of the earth. And then Paolo said the most important thing that changed my life. And he said, if you were so struck by this man, imagine the man that struck this man. And it was like such a reasonable thing. And that's when, for me personally, I started with Religious Sense. I started to really verify with my heart, with a certain intensity that was probably very irritating to everyone who was around me. But it was also the start of an adventure. For me, the faith had been in the past something that sort of was like, I was kind of born into it. It's like my thing, you have your thing, it's no big deal. At that point, it became something that was, all encompassing, something that we really followed, that made life make sense, made life in like a joy. I can't, it's hard to describe, but it changed, or hard to believe sometimes, but it changed my life entirely. And that's my Albacete introduction.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you. I'm gonna go to Michelle next. Michelle, the same kind of question, right? How did you get to meet Lorenzo, and then what developed from that?
Absolutely. Well, it was a long time. It was 1997. And we had just had this presentation of the Religious Sense at the UN. And I had helped to organize that with Olivetta. And following that, it was, I think, around the time that Monsignor had become more closely involved in the movement in the US. And long story short, Giorgio asked me to help Olivetta to basically be his personal assistant, right? And so that gave me, for those of you who do know, and maybe you just heard some of the stories, Monsignor is not, we're not talking about him for his organizational strengths. But I had this kind of special window into Monsignor's existence, because we actually shared a fear of opening our mail. So just like I had worked through, he would show up with the paper bag full of bills that, went back however many months, and we had to sort them through and figure out, why this or this other service may be on the brink of being turned off. I say that because I think one of the things that has struck so many people about the experience with Monsignor is just how at ease, no matter what it was you had going on, you could feel safe with him. And I think it was partly because of his own awareness of his humanity, He had this incredible kind of set of paradoxes of brilliance and insight and humor, and he was afraid to open his mail, right? And I think I was thinking about a few of the pieces or the characteristics, because there's so much you can say about Monsignor. And of course, we all have our share of really funny stories. And at the same time, I would never want to kind of only tell those funny stories because there's so much more to him, right? And I have funny stories too, but so one more note on how I know Monsignor, which I think is relevant, is that I met him in 97, and in 98, I turned 50 this year, so you get a feel for just kind of, I was in my late 20s at the time. And just after I met him, I began to verify the vocation to Members Domini, which is like a lay commitment to Christ within the movement. And so I knew him through my whole journey, in which I started that, eventually made my profession in that path, but then was not happy and moved first into the St. Joseph experience. And then out of that entirely, I had a big reset button about 10 years ago when I went back into, regular single person in the world. So Monsignor really accompanied me through that whole journey. And you can just imagine all the various events, that would happen there. So just a couple notes then about Monsignor that I think to me were really striking. One is that despite all of his brilliance and amazing characteristics, I think you never had a sense that his ego was what mattered in the interaction, right? It was always about you. And I think even more so, it was like the sense that he was always on your side, no matter what it was, no matter what challenge you brought to him, you could always have the sense that he was on your side. And at the same time, he didn't make it easy per se, right? It's like we're all having struggles as we go through life, and he wasn't ever dismissive. He would, in a way, invite you to yourself, right? Invite you to live to, in a way, that sense you have when you know that you are making good choices for yourself. And in addition, we shared a love for Monty Python, always referencing those sketches, sushi, poetry. And then at one point too, we were getting together monthly for talks on education. At the time, I was a grad student studying for my PhD in educational psychology. And I was running into all kinds of, interesting conversations at school about the philosophy of learning and education and what it means to be educated. And we would get together every month. He would spend at least an hour just talking over these ideas. And once again, inviting me to understand, for example, Dewey. I could be very critical of these different philosophies, but he would always invite me to understand, well, where's he coming from? Let's start from the point that he's not crazy. He's not trying to be a horrible person. So what experience is he coming from that would lead him to say these things that, yeah, you might disagree with, but have in some way their own validity, so that you can then actually engage effectively, engage as a peer and a friend. In a sense, that same idea of being on the same side of the table, or taking, being on your side. So I have lots of stories as well, but I just thought I'd kind of highlight some of the things that stick with me, that I, still call me today to that, being my best self.
No, thank you very much. I'm always struck by that, and it came across in the Albacete Show video. If you haven't seen it, I really encourage people. I'm going to take this time for a plug, right, to go watch the Albacete video at newyorkencounter.org. But he had a lot of personal failure in his life, right? You mentioned the fear of opening mail, but he had a lot of really professional and personal events that were disasters, and so he wasn't scandalized by this in himself, and he certainly wasn't scandalized in those who were his friends, right? And in fact, sometimes I would even say, sometimes I felt like it was those personal failures that he loved about me, and helped me to love, right? And that was really incredible. Rita, you have a lot of experience with Lorenzo as well, friendship, and maybe even a little bit of that secretarial duty that Michelle was highlighting sometimes too, right? Can you share a little bit about your experience with Lorenzo, how you got to know him, and then how that continues today?
Well, I met Monsignor probably around the same time Michelle did, I think. He was speaking at one of our events at NYU, and he was crunching potato chips into the microphone. And I impressed. I mean, I was like, who is this man? You know, not in the like, who is this man, but like, who is this man? You know, and he just seemed so irreverent to me. You know, when he took the Lord's name in vain, and he smoked cigarettes constantly, and he had nicotine stains, you know, on his fingernails, and dandruff on his collar, and I just, you know, I was very, you know, curious, like what's the story with this guy, you know, like, but it was undeniable that he was so funny and so smart, that you were just attracted to him, even in spite of, I mean, like I said, you know, I was such a very pious woman, you know, that I was very scandalized by a lot of his behavior, you know, and it took me a little bit to kind of get over that, you know. It wasn't automatic, you know. But I was in Members Domini, and this was like in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, and then the year 2000. So Monsignor started to become part of our house. He was like our visitor for our house meetings. And so I really got to know him very well. And he, you know, he was just so funny because he had no problem saying the things that everybody thought, you know, like we'd be reading these translations of, you know, Father Giussani, be like, why the hell does he have to repeat that over again? You know, like, and then he always, you know, he would always talk about how he, you know, he was, you know, what was the word he used? I can't remember now. But he would take like Father Giussani and make it, what was the word? Come on. Remember he used to say it all the time. Okay, I can't remember, but anyway, he just kind of, you know, he would tell, like, you know, Giussani would talk about Dante, you know, and Monsignor Albacete would talk about West Side Story, you know, I mean, that was, I can't remember the word, sorry, the word's gone, but somebody's got to know that word. He said it all the time. But anyway, so then I started to really, you know, warm up to Monsignor, and we ended up becoming very good friends. And he accompanied me through a very difficult period of my life, when I actually had a nervous breakdown and ended up in a mental hospital. And I was there, and I remember I was in my room. You know, it was one of these, you know, places in Manhattan where they actually like lock the door behind you, and you're like, you know, my God. And so Monsignor came to visit me. But before he came, I met this young woman in my room. She was my roommate in the hospital. And, you know, she just came in. She was like probably 18, 19-year-old young woman. And she just started telling me her story. And I was so upset, you know, she just told me these horrible things that she'd gone through. And all I said to her was, are you Catholic? And she said, yeah, you know. And I said, well, I have a priest who's coming to visit me. Would you like to go to confession? And she said, oh, okay. So Monsignor came in to visit, and I kind of met him at the door, and I said, when he saw me, he just laughed, you know, when he saw me standing there in my bedroom slippers, you know. And I said, Monsignor, I said, there's this woman here. She wants to go to confession. Can you hear her confession? He says, of course, you know. So I left the room, and he went in, and then when he came out, he said to me, the whole reason why you were in this hospital is so that woman could have her confession heard. So, you know, I mean, and that was quite an experience, because I realized what Christ will go through for one soul, you know, because imagine how much I suffered having to go into a mental hospital, you know. But I was okay. I got out in like 3 days. I was fine. Back to business as usual, you know. But the problem was that, you know, I think part of my problem was that I wasn't following the wrong vocational path. And Monsignor also accompanied me through that. And as everybody knows, I ended up getting married to someone very different from me, Frank Simmonds. And, Monsignor was the one that helped us in our pre-Cana because, Frank was not into the rules and regulations of the church. He didn't even want to go through pre-Cana. And the way that Monsignor befriended him, he made it so easy for Frank to accept, being married in the church. And they just loved each other. I mean, they agreed on they would gang up on me, and, they really, they just became such close friends, and they both had such great esteem for each other. And whenever we had a problem in our marriage, I could always call Monsignor and he always would help us, and in a very simple way, just by way of accompaniment. And then, as everybody also knows, I think Monsignor was very sick in October. It was October 15th, 2014. I called Olivetta, and Monsignor was in the, he was in Valhalla, I think, in Westchester, in the ICU there. And I asked her, I said, Frank and I, we want to come and see Monsignor. And she says, oh, please come, please come. He would love to see you both. And at that time, my husband was very, very sick also. But he wasn't as sick as Monsignor, but he had cancer, and he only lived 3 more months after Monsignor passed, so he was on oxygen, he was very frail, but Frank really wanted to go and see Monsignor. And like I said, it was October 15th. It was Father Giussani's birthday. And so we drove up, and I was very anxious. I was so anxious because I was like, Frank is going to like collapse, and like, I was like trying to help Frank, and I'm tangling his oxygen, and so we go into the hospital, and we see Olivetta, and she's like, go on in, and then I started to get really scared, like, Monsignor is going to die. I'm not going to be able to see him, and so I just ran. I like bolted in, like way ahead of Frank, and Frank was like following me, wheeling his, oxygen tank, and I get into the ICU, and I can't find Monsignor, and I'm just like looking around. I'm like, where are you? Where are you? And I'm looking, and this nurse points. He says he's there, and then I look, and I see this man who looks nothing like Monsignor. First, because he was so clean and shiny, like his head was had no hair on his head, but he was all clean. Like there wasn't a speck of dirt on him, but he was also very swollen. But then I ran up to him. I went to the side of his bed. He looked at me and he said, how are you? And I said, and I couldn't believe these words came out of my mouth. I said, Monsignor, Frank is dying. And I was shocked and because Monsignor was dying, and then he didn't say anything else. And then Frank came into the room and wheeling his oxygen, he went to the other side of the bed, and we're both holding his hand. I'm holding one hand, and Frank is holding the other. And then Frank just starts praying, like he starts pouring out his heart. God have mercy on this man, Monsignor Lorenzo. I'm sorry, Lorenzo, because Monsignor always told Frank, call me Lorenzo, call me Lorenzo. So whenever he called him Monsignor, he said, I'm sorry, Lorenzo. He said, have mercy on this man. Have mercy on this man who means so much to me. And Frank is crying. And then we pray the Our Father, we pray the Hail Mary, and then we're quiet, and we're holding Monsignor's hands, and all of a sudden, Frank just stops, and he starts nodding his head like that. And then he says, Frank looks at me and he says, okay, let's go. And I was like, okay, I'm thinking maybe he doesn't feel well. We got to pick up the kids from school. We better get out of here. Let's go. And so it was not a long visit. So we leave, And we get in the car, and Frank said, Monsignor told me I have to go to confession. And I'm like, what? Monsignor didn't say anything. And they said, and then he got really adamant with me. No, Monsignor told me I have to go to confession. And I was like, oh, okay. And he said, you don't want to know what it was? I said, no, I don't want to know what it was. And he's like, something happened a long time ago. You know, he's like, just never remember to confess it, you know, whatever. I'm like, it's all right. Don't tell me. I don't want to know, you know. So we got home, and of course, you know, Frank went to confession, and, you know, but it was amazing because, like I said, Monsignor didn't say anything. The only thing he said was, how are you? That's it. You know, so, you know, Frank and Monsignor, they had a very close relationship, and they understood each other, and they could speak to each other in ways which I couldn't hear. And I think that was always true. That was always true, even when, you know, they communicated in a way that I couldn't understand, because they were so true, unscandalized, not held by any kind of conventions or codes or standards. And they had a great free, and you know, it's funny because when Monsignor passed and then when Frank passed, I mean, I lost within 3 months, you know, I lost two of the closest people in my life, you know, and it was very interesting because I felt like I got to know them better in some ways after they passed, because, you know, there were certain things about my personality, because I was rigid, because I was uptight, that I couldn't accept about them. You know, like I couldn't fully love and appreciate them as much as I do now, you know. And I thank them that they, you know, that even beyond the grave, yeah, in the other world, you know, they're still able to open my heart and help me to change, you know, to not be so rigid, to not be so judgmental, to not have such high moral standards all the time. So I don't know, that there's a couple stories for you.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you. Beautiful. I don't know if we have questions. I'll turn it over to the chat coordinator to see if we have anyone who has shared a question yet, but I encourage you to do so, or even just to share what you have. And if we don't, then I'm sure that we have a couple of things that some of our guests could add to what they said, because these conversations spark more memories. So, Anne, do we have any questions from the floor?
Yeah, we don't have any questions now, but if you if anyone would like to share their experiences or questions while people are talking, please feel free to private message me.
Great. I know Michelle has something, so.
Sure. Well, as you said, Stephen, listening to Jay and Rita also sparked more memories, and even just thinking more about the experience of just the great gift of knowing Monsignor. I think that the not being afraid of my questions is one of the greatest gifts. And I think, Rita, you kind of touched on that as well, right? Kind of not being afraid of really asking anything, right? And being able to be completely honest with my experience, whether it's faith or love or whatever the area was. I always knew that in front of Monsignor, I didn't have to be afraid of my question. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes in more of the traditional kind of Catholic route, that we're taught to kind of put some questions aside, like, don't look over there, just keep, you know, look straight ahead, pay no attention. And I would say that's one of the gifts that stays with me. And Rita, just a little bit similar to your question is, so now my now longtime boyfriend he's a Jewish man. And part of what's come up in that experience has been, for example, learning more about some more of the church's unsavory history, right? And initially I was really resistant to even look, right? To let him ask the question or let myself ask the question. I think part of what's helped me to be fully, you know, again, take my ego entirely out of it, take my ideas entirely out of it and be open to looking is one of the ways that Monsignor's presence continues. You know, I do have a little bit of like a small miracle story. Rita was mentioning, and I think this also goes to this, that absolutely non-pietistic way that Monsignor lived friendship, right? And just lived his engagement with the world. I remember one time we were at a lunch. It was, I think, Jonathan Riro and David Horowitz, who sadly recently passed from COVID. He was a musician, also Jewish, actually. And we were at lunch, and Horowitz, like, Monsignor smoked. And in this little deli, there was no smoking allowed. And Monsignor made a joke about how, you know, he was sure the church was against it because it was kind of like contraception. You start something that you don't finish. So anyway, a little humorous story there from Monsignor. But when he was in the hospital, I was able to visit him. Actually just flew from California as soon as I realized he was there, so I could have a moment, you know, some moments with him. And I was able to be there in some of those moments that were the kind of pretty intense ones, you know, in those last couple weeks. And a lot of times it was just me and him kind of late at night. And I found myself just kind of, comforting him and calling him baby, you know, it's okay, baby. And I remember at one point, the nurse, they must have had mics, said, I'm not sure about the nature of your relationship, but anyway, but I found myself like being very free in that affection. And then later wondering if maybe I had made him uncomfortable. And it was kind of my only last lingering, oh gosh, I hope I didn't mess that up, you know, in his last moments. And a few months later, I got this little package from Olivetta. At one point, you know, a couple of years ago, he had been preparing a talk and he needed his own book, and of course didn't have any copies of his own book handy. So he asked me to bring mine, the one that he had signed. And she had rediscovered this, because I, of course, never got it back, right? So she had rediscovered this and kind of cleaning up his things. And she sent it back to me. And I want to show you the inscription: to Michelle, baby. And I mean, it's just still moving to me that kind of his, you know, this even, you know, how somehow anticipating and just putting me at ease once again. So those are just a couple more reflections.
If I could just say, you know, after watching the presentation last night on the relevance of the stars and thinking about Monsignor all morning, my question really, question really comes to mind, and that is, like, Monsignor was a great provocation because he was always himself. He was never trying to be anybody but himself. And, you know, a number of people said it, you know, he was very free. He was very free. So my question is maybe, you know, how do we come to that, you know, that we can really be free to be who we are, you know, because it's always a struggle. You know, we have a culture that tells us, you know, you got to be like this, you got to be like that, you know, now I'm white privileged, you know, so I'm thinking, oh, I'm white privileged, you know, and, you know, there's so many voices that want to define us. So how is it that we overcome that, you know, because I mean, that's just something that I want to like throw out there because it's very, very important to me. Like, I want to be that person, you know, I want to be like Frank, I want to be like Monsignor, but I am hemmed in by a lot of things.
You know, I have a couple stories that I'll just add briefly, but one is we had a worker one time that lived we had a little trailer on the farm, and it was after college, and we had these type of transitional people that come in and work for a year or so. And one of the things he wrote about us as he left, he said, he goes, when you show Jay and Stacy reality, they don't look away, they go deeper. And that reminded me very much. I thought that was given, that ability to not be afraid of reality was given to us through our experience with Albacete, because we weren't afraid. When we would see something and it would look ugly, we would say, look away. And in a kind of a funnier point on that, you know, when he would come to Houston, he always claimed that we had promised him fried chicken. So, he would, you promised fried chicken. We have to go get the best fried chicken. He had, this very particular Southern fried chicken in mind. And so one day he made a comment. He goes, you have to be able to, he said something more or less connecting your desire for chicken to a desire for Christ. And at first we all laughed like, this is ridiculous. And he goes, you guys are guilty of dualism. And we didn't know if he was joking. But as he got into it, the one thing he made very clear is, if God gave me this desire, let me go deeper in that. It must, like, God gave me this desire. Where is it going to lead? And I cannot eat fried chicken without not thinking about Christ. And that's just a beautiful gift.
Yeah. The fried chicken. Then we do have a question. If the chat moderator could unmute Rachel McKernan. Rachel, please.
Okay, so yeah, I met Albacete, I think sorry, sometimes my computer's a terrible connection, so if I cut out, I apologize. I met Albacete, I think in 2006 at a crew vacation, and was wonderful because he was so disgusting, but I felt so loved. With his smoking, or like Rita was saying, like the amount of food on his shirt, like it was just very unappetizing. But it's always struck me how somehow that man made drawing towards the great things in life much easier. And kind of, I think, Rita, you were saying, like, how do we become free like that? But I was thinking in particular about confession, because it's something that I've been with some friends. We help some kids who are making their confirmation to prepare for that, and we were talking about confession with them and saying, like, it's something difficult, and I realized, like, for myself, it's something I find really difficult to do, and I don't have great sins to confess. It's just like there's a real big hesitancy, sometimes it's like, oh, I should go, and then I just won't go. And so I was thinking about, like 10 years ago, Albacete used to write the final page on traces. And one of them was about his first confession that he ever gave as a priest. And this guy came into the confession. He said, like, he was super nervous to the confessional. Sorry. He said he was super nervous. And he said, like, I have some crazy things to tell you. And Albacete said, like, that won't be so hard to hear. Like, this is my first confession. And the man laughed. And I've heard other people speak about their experience of confessing with him. And it always struck me as, like, that he was somebody who made drawing towards, like, those more difficult sacraments somewhat easier, or less of a fearful experience. And so my question is, if anyone can speak to that, either their experience of confessing with him. Obviously I don't need to hear your sins, but just what it was like to have, like, such a human person on the other end. And I think that's the best way I can formulate it. So yeah, I'd like to hear more about that if possible. Thank you.
Michelle, go ahead. And I know that Camila was in the room earlier. She has a great story too.
Yeah, I think I agree, and I have personally had that experience, and I have close friends who've had that experience. And I think I'm not alone in probably having confessed things I just never said to any other priest or person that I was free to say to Monsignor. And he said a number of, like, I think there were some things he said and did that made that, again, that sense that he was 100% on your side. So no matter what, like, beep, crap, you were going to show up with, he was going to be okay with it. And I think one important thing, and I think it's something we can all carry with us, is that he said he never heard a sin confessed that he didn't find some trace of in himself.
Yeah.
Right? He could not, there was never anything he heard that he could in some way imagine himself also doing. So, and in fact, one of my closest friends said that when she was struggling to go to confession, he said, he wanted to put her at ease, and he's like, well, what if I tell you one of my sins? And then, like, or the worst thing I've ever done. I think it was actually more the anecdote. And just this idea that, and I think it's true for all of us, it's so easy to look out and think, okay, well, these are these things that I will do, but those other things I won't. And Rachel, I don't know if it's exactly an answer to your question, because it's maybe more about the way we engage with others, but maybe just knowing that you aren't alone, right? And importantly, that I think why was Monsignor so free? It's because he did have this profound trust. And it's a trust that comes out of asking the question and repeatedly finding kind of sustenance in the answer, right? Doing that constantly. So it's sort of that paradox of if you keep engaging in the work, then you layer on that confidence, that trust in the goodness of what's behind all this, so that you can then be free to be yourself, because you don't enter it in fear, you enter it maybe with some not knowing, but knowing that there's goodness. So I think that's, you know, what he grew in himself and was able then to invite us into.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Rita.